The world knew Billie Holiday by the white gardenia flower in her hair. That iconic image had become Lady Day's signature. But FBI agents from 1947 onward noted a strange detail in their reports. Billie Holiday repeated the same ritual every night before going on stage, moving her lips and closing her eyes as she placed the gardenia flower, as if she was praying, as if she was casting a protective spell. That terrible night in New Orleans in 1938 had condemned Billie to that flower, and no one knew the truth. Not until something horrifying happened one night in 1958, when she forgot to wear the flower. This wasn't just a style choice. This was a survival mechanism, and the truth behind it was a trauma Billie Holiday never had the courage to share with anyone. If you want to discover the darkest secrets of music history, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because the story we're telling today isn't just about a flower. It's about a woman's struggle to survive. When Billie Holiday first appeared with a white gardenia flower at Café Society in 1939, music critics interpreted it as simply a chic style choice. Vogue magazine published an article titled "Lady Day's Elegant Signature." Downbeat magazine described the gardenia flower as an indispensable part of Billie's stage costumes. But no one knew the real reason behind that flower resting in Billie's hair. Because this story began a year earlier, on a humid August night in 1938 in New Orleans, and what happened that night left such a deep wound in Billie Holiday's soul that the gardenia flower became not just an accessory, but a survival mechanism. At that time, Billie was only 23 years old and experiencing the brightest period of her career. She had gone on tour with the Count Basie Orchestra and was performing concerts in southern states, trying to survive as a black female artist in places where racism was at its most brutal. Her concert in New Orleans was unforgettable. The small jazz club in the French Quarter was packed, and that night Billie sang "My Man" with such passion that the audience gave her a standing ovation. When she returned to her dressing room after the concert, she was tired but happy, until there was a knock at the door. A white man stood at the door. In his 30s, well-dressed, smiling. In his hands was a bouquet of large white gardenia flowers. "I watched you, Miss Holiday," the man said in a polite voice. "You were magnificent. I brought these flowers for you. A beautiful voice like yours deserves beautiful flowers." Billie thanked him and took the flowers. The man was standing at the threshold of the dressing room, seeming to try to enter. "Miss Holiday, maybe I could get an autograph, and maybe a photo." Billie was tired and wanted to return to her hotel as soon as possible, but she was always kind to her fans. "Sure," she said, and let the man inside. But as soon as the door closed, the expression on the man's face changed. The smile vanished. His eyes went cold. And at that moment, Billie Holiday realized she had made a terrible mistake, because this man wasn't just a fan and the gardenia flowers weren't just a gift. What happened in the next 20 minutes, Billie Holiday could never fully tell throughout her life. She only gave partial details to a few people, her closest friend Tallulah Bankhead, and much later to her psychiatrist. But in FBI files, in reports prepared after 1947, there was a strange note. Subject shows signs of post-traumatic stress following the 1938 New Orleans incident. The gardenia flower wearing ritual began after this event. How did the FBI obtain this information? Because New Orleans police had been called to Billie's hotel room that night, and the police report had been stored in archives for years. What was written in the report was horrifying. Billie Holiday had been assaulted in her hotel room on Royal Street, found with bruises on her face, disheveled hair, torn dress. Gardenia flowers were scattered everywhere in the room, on the bed, on the floor, on the table. And Billie Holiday had told the police only one thing: "I never want to see those flowers again." But here's the strange part. A year later, in 1939, when Billie Holiday began appearing on stage with a gardenia flower, no one connected it to that night. Because Billie had never talked about it. The New Orleans police had recorded the incident as assault of a black woman by a white male, and no further investigation was conducted. Because in 1938, Louisiana, such an incident wasn't considered important. The man was never found, never arrested, and Billie Holiday had to live with this trauma alone. But Billie's mind developed a strange mechanism to survive, transforming what she feared into her power. Gardenia flowers would no longer be a symbol of the assault, they would become a symbol of protection. If she wore that flower by her own choice, the control was hers. If she chose that flower, she would be powerful. This was a psychological shield mechanism, and Billie Holiday wasn't even aware of it. She just instinctively knew that she couldn't go on stage without that flower, because that flower kept her safe. Tallulah Bankhead, Broadway's most famous star and Billie's closest friend, was shocked when she learned the Gardenia secret from Lady Day in 1942. The two had met at a jazz club in New York, and she had witnessed Billie's ritual. Before going on stage, she had taken the gardenia flower in her hand, closed her eyes, and moved her lips. Tallulah had asked curiously, "Darling, what are you doing?" Billie had tried to smile at first. "Just preparing myself," she'd said. But Tallulah had insisted, and that night, over the last of their whiskey glasses, Billie Holiday told the story of that New Orleans night, for the first time fully telling someone. In Tallulah's diary, on the page dated 1942, she had written, "Billie told me the most terrible story today, how my poor darling's heart was broken, and now I understand that gardenia flower is her armor. If the control is hers, she feels safe. If that flower is in her hair, no one can touch her. It's that simple, and that tragic." When the FBI began following Billie Holiday in 1947, due to the strange fruit song and heroin addiction, agents reported every detail, and the gardenia flower ritual entered the files. In FBI agent James Fletcher's 1948 report, these lines appeared: "Subject performs white gardenia flower wearing ritual before each performance, takes flower in hand, closes eyes and moves lips. This behavior is like a religious ritual. Subject's psychological condition should be investigated." Why did the FBI care so much about this ritual? Because they didn't see Billie Holiday as just a singer. They saw her as America's most dangerous woman. The strange fruit song disturbed the government, and they were looking for ways to control Billie. They wanted to find psychological weak points, and the gardenia flower ritual seemed like a weak point. There was another interesting observation in FBI reports. Billie Holiday's performance was different on nights when she couldn't find a gardenia flower. At a 1949 concert in Chicago, the flower supplier had been late, and Billie had been forced to go on stage without a gardenia. An FBI agent was there, and wrote in his report, "Subject was visibly uncomfortable when going on stage without the gardenia flower. Her hands were shaking. She forgot several times while singing. She left the stage immediately after the performance." This flower is a psychological anchor point for the subject. The FBI was right. But the reason was much darker than they thought, because the gardenia flower wasn't just a performance accessory for Billie Holiday. It was the only way to keep her trauma under control. Without that flower, that night in 1938 came back to life in her mind. She lost control, and losing control on stage was Billie's greatest fear. After learning this truth, Tallulah Bankhead became Billie's protector. At every concert, if possible, she was there and made sure the gardenia flower was ready. In the 1950s, when Billie's heroin addiction worsened and she became unable to perform regularly, Tallulah still supported her, but she was afraid of one thing. What would happen if one day Billie had to go on stage without that flower? What would happen if the trauma returned? This fear became reality in 1950, and exactly what Tallulah feared happened. It was before the Carnegie Hall concert in March 1958. Billie Holiday was 43 years old at the time, and her health was rapidly deteriorating. Heroin addiction, cirrhosis, and years of FBI pressure had worn her down. But she still went on stage, because music was her only escape. That night, while preparing in her dressing room, her manager gave her terrible news. The florist couldn't bring the gardenia flower. It was March, and finding fresh gardenia was almost impossible. "Let's use another flower," her manager said. "White rose, orchid." But Billie's face went pale. "No," she said. "It has to be gardenia. I can't go on without gardenia." Her manager didn't understand. "Billie, the audience is waiting. You can't cancel the concert for just a flower." But Billie Holiday had collapsed in the corner of the dressing room. Her hands were shaking. She couldn't breathe. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Without that flower, I'm not safe. Without that flower, everything comes back." When Tallulah Bankhead entered backstage, she found Billie on the floor, having a panic attack. She immediately understood what was happening. "No gardenia?" she asked, and Billie nodded. Tallulah made a decision in that moment. She removed the white gardenia brooch from her own hair, a valuable jewel inherited from her mother that she'd worn for years. "Take this," she said to Billie. "It's not a real gardenia, but it's white, and it's mine. This will protect you." Billie looked at that brooch, then at Tallulah. Tears were streaming from her eyes. "But it's yours," she said. "You're more important than me," Tallulah said. "Now get up and go on stage. I'm here. I'm protecting you." That night, Billie Holiday went on stage with the white jeweled brooch. It wasn't a real gardenia, but it was enough, because Tallulah's love was there, protection was there, and that night at Carnegie Hall, Billie Holiday gave one of the career performances of her life. But this truth was clear. The trauma was still there. 10 years had passed, 20 years had passed, but that night in 1938 still lived inside Billie, and the gardenia flower was the only way to keep it under control. By the late 1950s, whispers began circulating in the music world. Everyone knew about Billie Holiday's gardenia obsession, but now people were curious about the reason. Some jazz musicians talked about the 1938 incident in New Orleans prodded, but the details were blurry. Most at the level of rumors. No one knew exactly what happened because Billie wasn't talking and police reports weren't public. But one thing was clear: Billie Holiday's relationship with the gardenia flower wasn't a normal artist quirk. It was something deeper, something darker. Count Basie remembered the days when he was on tour with Billie years ago. He had noticed that Billie had changed after 1938. She had become more withdrawn, more fragile, more defensive. After New Orleans, Billie was a different person, Basie had said in an interview years later. It was like something had broken inside her. And that gardenia flower, that flower was like a shield for her. Without it, she seemed lost. Basie didn't know the details, but his intuition was correct. That night in 1938 had left permanent damage in Billie Holiday's soul. And the music industry, the FBI, the media, no one had taken it seriously. Because in 1938, who cared about what happened to a black woman? But 6 months after that Carnegie Hall night in 1958, what Billie Holiday feared finally happened. It was November, and Billie was going to perform at a small jazz club in Boston. Her health was very poor. Cirrhosis was progressing. She was having trouble breathing, and heroin addiction had brought her almost to the breaking point. The club owner had suggested she cancel the performance, but Billie had refused. "I have to sing," she'd said. "While I still can, I have to sing." That night, while preparing in her dressing room, she realized she had forgotten her gardenia flower in New York. She hadn't taken it with her when packing her suitcase. And finding fresh gardenia in Boston in November was impossible. Panic came suddenly, Nia's heart racing, hands shaking, breath cut short. But this time, Tallulah wasn't there. There was no one to save her. And the audience was waiting. Billie Holiday made a decision: she would go on stage, without the gardenia. Because she was so tired now, so exhausted, that she didn't even have the strength to be afraid anymore. "Maybe I don't need that flower anymore," she thought. "Maybe I can be strong." But when the stage lights came on, and she walked to the microphone, she realized she was wrong. The trauma had never gone away. It had just been suppressed. And without the gardenia flower, all the walls collapsed. When she started singing, her voice was trembling. Her hands were swinging uncontrollably. And suddenly, in the middle of the stage, that night from 20 years ago came back. New Orleans, hotel room. Gardenia flowers, and that man's face. Billie Holiday stopped in the middle of the song. She backed away from the microphone. The audience watched in silence. And then Billie ran off the stage. The club owner found her in the dressing room. In the corner, knees pulled to her chest, crying. "I can't," she was whispering. "No flower, I'm not safe. I can't." The performance was cancelled that night. Boston newspapers came out the next day with headlines. Billie Holiday abandoned stage. No one knew the real reason, but that night Billie Holiday understood something. The trauma had never gone away. For 20 years she had just hidden behind the gardenia flower, and now she didn't have the strength to hide anymore. Entering 1959, Billie Holiday was dying. Cirrhosis was slowly killing her, and doctors said she didn't have much time. But Billie was still trying to sing, because music was her only identity. And the gardenia flower was still there. At every performance, she wore it in her hair. But now the ritual took longer. She took the flower in her hand and held it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. She closed her eyes and cried. "Protect me," she whispered. "Just a little longer. Please protect me." When she made her last studio recording in New York in March 1959, the Lady in Satin album producer Ray Ellis had witnessed the gardenia ritual. Billie requested a gardenia flower before coming to the studio. Ellis recounted years later. "She said she wouldn't record without the flower, so we found one. And before recording, she sat with the gardenia flower for half an hour, just holding it. Like she was gathering strength. Like she was taking energy from that flower." Ellis didn't understand then, but he understood now. Billie Holiday couldn't exist without that flower anymore. For 20 years, that flower had become part of her identity. And now, even as she was dying, she couldn't let go of that flower. In May 1959, Billie Holiday was admitted to Metropolitan Hospital. Cirrhosis was in its final stage, and doctors said there was nothing they could do. As Billie lay in the hospital bed, only a few close friends were by her side, and at the bedside, in a small vase, white gardenia flowers stood. Tallulah Bankhead had brought them. "I couldn't leave Billie without her flowers," Tallulah had said. "Those flowers can't be without her. And she can't be without those flowers." Hospital staff found it strange. Bringing flowers for a dying woman was normal. But these flowers were different. Billie looked at them, reached out to touch them, and smiled. As if those flowers comforted her. As if those flowers still protected her. FBI agents were still watching Billie Holiday even while she was in the hospital. There was an arrest warrant, due to heroin addiction, and they wanted to close the file even if she died. When Agent George White entered the hospital room, he had seen Billie with her gardenia flowers. In his report he wrote, "Subject does not separate from gardenia flowers even on her deathbed." Constantly looking at the vase at the bedside, the psychological importance of these flowers to the subject is clear. The FBI never understood Billie's gardenia obsession until the end. They just recorded it as strange behavior. But the truth was much deeper, much more tragic. Billie Holiday had hidden a trauma behind those flowers for 21 years. And now, as she was dying, those flowers were giving her her final comfort. On the morning of July 17, 1959, at 3:10 a.m., Billie Holiday died. By her side were Tallulah Bankhead, her manager, and a few close friends. And at the bedside, in the vase, white gardenia flowers still stood. Tallulah took one of those flowers and placed it in Billie's hand. "You're safe now," she whispered. "No one can touch you anymore. That night is behind you now." At Billie Holiday's funeral, there were gardenia flowers too. On top of the casket, a white bouquet. And as the music world mourned, no one knew that those flowers weren't just decoration, they were the symbol of Billie's struggle to survive. When Tallulah Bankhead died in 1968, There was a strange clause in her will. My private diaries will be burned. No one will read them. But Tallulah's niece decided, out of curiosity, to read the diaries before burning them. She just wanted to look once. And what she read shocked her. On pages dated 1942 in Tallulah's diary, Billie Holiday's New Orleans story was written in full detail. The hotel room, the assault, the gardenia flowers, and how Billie lived with those flowers for 20 years. Tallulah had written in her diary, "Today I learned Billie's true story. That poor soul can't forget what happened that night 20 years ago. The gardenia flower is her armor. If the control is hers, she feels safe. If that flower is in her hair, that night in 1938 won't happen again. I promised her, as long as I live I'll protect her. And I'll make sure those flowers are always with her." Tallulah's niece didn't know what to do with this information. Billie Holiday had died 10 years ago, and was there any point in creating a scandal? She finally decided to burn the diaries, respecting Tallulah's will request. But before the niece died, in an interview in the 1990s, she gave hints. "My Aunt Tallulah would say she had a very special friendship with Billie Holiday. And she knew that the gardenia flower wasn't just an accessory. It carried a deeper meaning, but she never shared the details. Because she respected Billie's secrets." This hint caught the attention of music historians, and research began. In 1995, music historian Dr. Angela Davis was researching the gardenia flower mystery for her doctoral thesis on Billie Holiday. After Tallulah Bankhead's niece's 1990 interview, Davis decided to dive into the New Orleans police archives. She scanned the archives for months, for records from 1938, and finally found it. Royal Street Hotel, August 1938, a police report registered in Billie Holiday's name. The report was 2 pages long, and written in official language, but the truth that seeped through was horrifying. Suspect black female claims to have been assaulted by a white male in hotel room. Bruises on face, disheveled hair, torn clothing, white gardenia flowers scattered throughout room. Suspect female cannot clearly identify the white male. Opening an investigation following the incident is not recommended. When Dr. Davis read that report, she felt her hands trembling. Tallulah Bankhead had been right. Billie Holiday really had experienced a terrible trauma, and the police had said opening an investigation is not recommended. Because in 1938, Louisiana, a black woman's complaint wasn't considered important. The man was never searched for, never questioned, never punished. And Billie Holiday had to live with this trauma alone. Davis shared these findings in an academic article she published in 1997, Billie Holiday's Gardenia Flower: Transformation from Trauma to Symbol. The article became a turning point in music history, because now everyone knew. The gardenia flower wasn't just a style choice. It was a survival mechanism. But story didn't end there. When FBI archives were opened to the public under the Freedom of Information Act in the 2000s, another shocking detail emerged in Billie Holiday's file. The FBI hadn't just observed the gardenia ritual. They had tried to actively use it. In a 1950 FBI report, Agent Fletcher had suggested subject's gardenia flower dependency is a psychological weak point. If we can block flower supply, we can stress the subject. Subject under stress may make mistakes and create grounds for arrest. The FBI had actually tried this. At a 1952 concert in Chicago, the FBI had contacted the gardenia flower supplier and requested that he not sell flowers to Billie. The supplier had been scared and refused. And when Billie Holiday couldn't find flowers that night, she had a panic attack and had to cancel the concert. This wasn't just surveillance, it was psychological torture. When music historians read these documents, they were outraged. The FBI knew about Billie Holiday's trauma and had tried to use it as a weapon. The gardenia flower was a protection mechanism for Lady Day, and the FBI had targeted it. This was one of the most ruthless things a government could do to an artist, and Billie Holiday had lived through it knowingly. Words she had said to a friend in the 1950s now took on new meaning. They want to destroy me. Not just by arresting me. They want to destroy me from the inside. They want to take everything from me, every support I have. Billie was right. The FBI wasn't just looking for a criminal, they were trying to systematically break down a woman. In the 2010 trauma psychologists began examining the Billie Holiday case. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychologist specializing in trauma, described Billie's gardenia ritual as a classic example of post-traumatic stress disorder in an article she published in 2015. Billie Holiday had developed a ritual to control trauma, Mitchell wrote. Although the gardenia flower was a trigger of the traumatic event, Billie transformed it into a power symbol. This is known in psychology as a transformational coping mechanism. The trauma victim tries to gain power by controlling what they fear, but this mechanism is fragile. If control is lost, trauma returns. Mitchell's analysis perfectly explained that Boston night in 1958. When Billie went on stage without a gardenia, she had lost control, and the trauma had returned, even 20 years later. What happened that night was vivid in Billie's mind. Trauma never completely heals, Mitchell wrote. It's only managed, and Billie Holiday managed her trauma with the gardenia flower for 21 years. But this didn't mean the trauma was gone, it just meant it was suppressed. Modern psychology now understood much better what Billie Holiday experienced. But in 1938, in the 1950s, no one had helped Billie. No one had suggested trauma treatment, because a black woman's mental health wasn't considered important. So why had the music industry never asked? For decades, record company executives, managers, musicians had seen Billie Holiday's gardenia obsession, but no one had asked why. No one had tried to learn the real reason. Because for them, Billie Holiday was a product. She was a singer, an entity that made money. Her psychological health, her trauma, her pain was unimportant. It was enough that she just went on stage and sang, and if the gardenia flower was necessary to get her on stage, then gardenia would be provided, but the reason wouldn't be asked. Count Basie had said years later that he regretted this. We all knew Billie had a special relationship with the gardenia flower, he said in an interview. But we never asked why. We just said Billie's quirk and moved on. Now I think, maybe if we'd asked, maybe we could have helped. Maybe we could have gotten her trauma treated. But we never asked, and Billie lived with that pain alone. Basie's regret was real, but it was too late. Billie Holiday had died in 1959, and no one had helped her while she was alive. Waiters, technical crew, and doormen who worked at jazz clubs in the 1940s and 1950s recounted Billie Holiday's gardenia ritual years later. A former waiter who worked at the Village Vanguard said in a 2005 interview, Billie would do the same thing every night. She'd enter the dressing room, lock the door, put the gardenia flower on the table. Then she'd sit quietly, looking at the flower, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes. We'd wait outside, but we couldn't go in. The door was locked. Then Billie would come out, the flower in her hair, and it was like she'd transformed into a different person, stronger, more confident. She'd walk to the stage and enchant everyone. A former technical staff member who worked at Blue Note also told a similar story. One night the power went out, and the lights in the dressing room went off. Billie was inside doing her gardenia ritual. We knocked on the door, Miss Holiday. The power's out, let us light a candle, we said. But Billie shouted no. Don't come in, I can do it in the dark. We were shocked, but Billie really did complete her ritual in the dark. When the lights came back on, she came out, the flower in her hair, and went on stage as if nothing had happened. At that moment we understood that this ritual was vitally important to Billie. Light dark, whatever happened, She had to complete that ritual. Billie Holiday's final concert was at the Phoenix Theater in New York in May 1959. She was very sick that night. Cirrhosis was killing her, she was having trouble breathing, and doctors had said she shouldn't go on stage. But Billie had insisted, "I want to sing one last time." While preparing in her dressing room, she held the gardenia flower longer than ever. Her manager was waiting outside and was worried because Billie had stayed inside for more than half an hour. When the door finally opened, Billie's face was wet with tears. But the gardenia flower was in her hair, and Billie was smiling. "I'm ready," she said. Ready for the last time. When Billie Holiday went on stage that night, the audience gave her a standing ovation. Everyone knew this was probably the last time they'd see Lady Day. Billie approached the microphone, touched the gardenia flower, as if wishing for luck, and began to sing. Her voice was no longer as powerful as it used to be. Heroin and illness had destroyed her vocal cords. But the emotions were still there. The pain was still there, and as Billie sang Strange Fruit, she touched the gardenia flower with every line, as if drawing strength from that flower, as if that flower was keeping her standing. After the concert, as Billie left the stage, she stumbled and almost fell. The crew helped and took her to the dressing room. And there, as Billie collapsed into a chair, she removed the gardenia flower from her hair and held it in her palm. "Thank you," she whispered to the flower. "You protected me one last time." 2 weeks later, when Billie Holiday was admitted to Metropolitan Hospital, the first thing she requested was gardenia flowers. "I want my flowers," she told the nurses. White gardenia flowers. The nurses found it strange. Why was a dying woman requesting a specific flower? But Tallulah Bankhead explained the situation. "These flowers are vitally important to Billie. Please find them." And they found them. A small vase with 3 white gardenia flowers. Billie wanted that vase at her bedside, where she could always see it. "Now I'm safe," she said. "The flowers are here. I'm safe." In her final days, Billie experienced periods of consciousness. Sometimes awake, sometimes unconscious. But when she was awake, the first thing she did was look at the gardenia flowers. One day, Tallulah asked Billie, "Darling, why are these flowers so important to you?" And Billie, when very close to death, finally told the complete truth. "That night in New Orleans," she whispered, "that man brought me flowers. And then he hurt me. He hurt me so much, and I decided I would never be that vulnerable again. If I control the flowers, if I choose them, no one can catch me like that again. Do you understand, Tallulah? The flowers are my control. The flowers are my power." At that moment, Tallulah understood everything she had known for 20 years, but now she grasped the full depth. The gardenia flower wasn't just protection for Billie. It was a symbol of control. She had lost control in 1938, but with the gardenia flower, she had taken control back. And now, even as she was dying, she didn't want to let go of that control. "You never lost your control," Tallulah said through tears. "You were always strong, Billie. Those flowers just reminded you." Billie smiled, her last real smile. "Maybe you're right," she said. "Maybe I always carried the power." On the morning of July 17, 1959, when Billie Holiday's final hours came, only a few people were at the bedside. Tallulah, her manager, and 2 close friends. And the gardenia flowers were still there. They had wilted now, their petals were falling, but they were there. Billie drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point she opened her eyes, looked at the flowers, and smiled. "They're still here," she whispered. "Still protecting me." Tallulah held Billie's hand. "Yes, darling. And now you can rest. You don't need to be protected anymore. You're safe now." At 3:10 a.m., Billie Holiday took her last breath. Tallulah immediately took one of the gardenia flowers and placed it in Billie's hand. "Go with you," Tallulah said. "Stay with you forever." The next day newspapers came out with headlines. Jazz legend Billie Holiday dies. The death reports told of Lady Day's career, the strange fruit song, FBI pressure. But none mentioned the gardenia flower, because no one knew the flower's real meaning. Not yet. Billie Holiday's funeral was held on July 21, 1959, at St. Paul the Apostle Church in Harlem. Thousands of people poured into the streets. Jazz musicians, fans, journalists. The church was packed, and on top of the casket was a magnificent flower arrangement. And right in the center of that arrangement, white gardenia flowers glowed. Tallulah Bankhead had made the arrangement herself, with Billie's favorite flowers. It would have been wrong to bury Billie without her flowers, Tallulah had said. Those flowers were her identity, her power, and now they'll stay with her forever. As musicians speaking at the funeral praised Billie, Tallulah cried quietly, because she knew Billie Holiday, everyone knew, the powerful woman on stage, was actually a fragile soul fighting her trauma every day. And the gardenia flowers were the symbol of that fight. As she was lowered into the grave, Tallulah threw one last gardenia flower onto the casket. "Rest in peace, Lady Day," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." As years passed, the Billie Holiday legend grew. Strange Fruit became the forerunner of protest songs. Lady Day was remembered as a revolutionary master of jazz vocal technique, but the gardenia flower story remained secret for a long time, until Tallulah's niece gave hints in the 1990s, until Dr. Angela Davis found police reports in 1997, until FBI files were opened in the 2000s. And when the truth finally came out, the world was shocked. The gardenia flower wasn't just a style choice. It was a symbol of trauma, survival, and the search for control. Today, when music historians tell of Billie Holiday, they always tell the gardenia flower story. Because this story isn't unique to Billie, it's the story of countless women who experienced trauma, were expected to remain silent, couldn't get help. The injustice done to Billie Holiday in New Orleans in 1938 wasn't just assault, it was also the system's failure to protect her. The police's failure to open an investigation, society's failure to speak out, and Billie had to cope with her trauma alone. The gardenia flower was her weapon, against trauma, against fears, against loss of control. Today, many artists have begun wearing gardenia flowers as a tribute to Billie Holiday. Beyoncé wore a gardenia in a 2016 photo shoot, where she portrayed Billie Holiday. Lady Gaga went on stage with a white gardenia flower in her hair during a performance dedicated to Billie. And Andra Day, while portraying Billie in the 2021 film The United States vs. Billie Holiday, recreated the gardenia ritual in the most detailed way. "The gardenia isn't just a flower," Day said in an interview. "For Billie this meant survival, it meant control, it meant power, and it can carry different meanings for every woman. But fundamentally, it's a symbol of transforming trauma into power." Feminist academics also studied Billie Holiday's gardenia story. In a 2018 article titled The Billie Holiday Case, trauma expert Dr. Jennifer Brown wrote, "Society expects trauma victims to get over it. But trauma doesn't work that way. Trauma is managed, controlled, lived with." Billie Holiday did this with the gardenia flower, with her own method, her own power. And this is a lesson for every trauma survivor. You may not be able to eliminate trauma, but you can control it. You can find your own symbol. You can build your own power. Billie Holiday's gardenia flower story isn't just about a flower, it's about survival, resistance, and the search for control. That terrible night in New Orleans in 1938 changed Billie's life forever. But Billie refused to be defeated. She turned trauma into a weapon. She turned fear into power. And for 21 years, she stood with the gardenia flower. Yes, the trauma never completely went away. Yes, Billie was alone and couldn't get help, but she didn't give up. She went on stage every night. She sang every night. And every night, the gardenia flower reminded her, "You're in control, you're powerful, you're alive." Today when you listen to Billie Holiday, you're not just hearing that magnificent voice, you're hearing the soul of a woman who danced with trauma, sang with pain, and still managed to stand. And the gardenia flower in her hair is no longer just an accessory. It's an eternal symbol of resistance, power, and survival. Perhaps today you'll look at gardenia flowers differently. Perhaps you'll remember that every white gardenia might be someone's effort to control their trauma. And perhaps Billie Holiday's legacy will be this: beyond her songs, trauma can't destroy you if you transform it into power. Lady Day accomplished this for 21 years, and the gardenia flower will continue to tell her story of triumph forever.